Welcome back. Nowhere has the shift in French policy and politics been as dramatic as in terms of its relationship with the United States and Israel. President Sarkozy seems to have abandoned the Gaullist tradition of independent foreign policy in favor of direct alliance with the United States and rejoining NATO fully and unconditionally. Or as former French Foreign Minister Hubert Védrine put it, Sarkozy actually believes in new Westernism in the sense of American neoconservatives. Mark Seddon reports from the French capital on the new direction in France's foreign policy.
The left bank in Paris. Once the home of left-leaning revolutionaries and intellectuals, but now some argue that the political minds steering France have swung wildly to the right.
But to what extent do neoconservatives, albeit neoconservatives with French characteristics, influence that French foreign policy change? Well, that largely depends on who you talk to.
We speak in French of French neoconservative. It's true and not true.
No, I don't think it's true. First of all, we don't have a neoconservative movement.
No, I don't think at all that Sarkozy is even close to that neocon agenda.
Are you a neoconservative?
No, I'm not, because you could not be one. Neoconservatism is an American movement.
Neoconservatism got a bad reputation during the Bush era. It was associated with preemptive foreign wars, torture and the like. In short, American imperialism. France has traditionally gone its own way, following a policy of exceptionalism. De Gaulle famously infuriated America when he said non to US domination of NATO. Dominique de Villepin also stood up to the Americans and said non to war in Iraq. The election of President Sarkozy was supposed to heal that rift. France would continue to champion its own foreign policy objectives, but more in step with the United States.
Of course, Sarkozy coming as a president, he was clearly pro-American, even during the Bush period, and he wanted to change the Gaullist policy. That doesn't mean that the French policy will be like the American policy.
Sarkozy was very close to Washington, to a kind of theory saying we should become Atlantist, not European, not Mediterranean.
President Sarkozy certainly followed America's lead with a much more friendly attitude towards Israel.
For Israel, Sarkozy was clearly saying all the time that he's a very, very good friend of Israel, and it's true.
The problem of the French policy now is it has not changed in its aim, saying we want a two-state solution. But in fact, it's exerting pressures on the Palestinians and not on Israel.
But it was Sarkozy's position on Gaza that exposed his pro-Israeli position.
The French attitude was to say that the responsibility of the Gaza war was on Hamas, not on Israel, which is, a way to support Israel.
On Gaza, there was a difference because Sarkozy wanted France to play a particular role as a deal maker or even peacemaker.
Even when discussing another so-called neocon priority, humanitarian intervention, President Sarkozy's ideological position is somewhat ambiguous.
Do you think that the Sarkozy administration is much more sympathetic to humanitarian interventionism?
In theory, yes. In practice, no. If there is misery here or there, we need to help. That's the principle. But then, if you consider that this right to protect may affect world stability, it's a mixture of positive attitude and, at the same time, pragmatism.
Sarkozy intends that our foreign affairs policy continue to be independent. And he will say exactly to Mr. Obama what he has to say, and to Mr. Medvedev what he has to say.
This pick-and-mix approach to foreign policy, reaching out to Syria while taking a hard line towards Iran, may owe something to President Sarkozy's notorious distrust of protocol and his love of more informal moments. The question remains, is Sarkozy driven by ideology or political pragmatism?
Edwin, is France under Sarkozy, pro-American, simply and unlike it used to be before?
It's not France, pro-American France. I think the neoconservative trend is not closed with Obama. It's still running in France. And our French guides are not copies of the American, the US species. They are really French. Actually, Sarkozy, if you don't only learn the speech, but also see what he is doing, is the exact opposite of Obama. First, on Middle East, Sarkozy, its position is unfair, close to Israel, despite the criminal war in Gaza, and despite the worst Israeli government with the racist Lieberman. Second, Sarkozy is strongly the admission of Turkey in the Union European. Third, for Sarkozy, Islam is a strange word, which he doesn't understand at all. On these 3 points, Obama is the exact opposite.
Let's be clear about it. Obama didn't say anything during Gaza. He was just about to be inaugurated.
He wasn't president.
But he wasn't president, but he was very, very silent during
His first call, when he was elected, was to the chief of the Palestinian Authority. And I think Obama is our last chance.
Well, that may be, but I don't see what France is doing to stand in the way of that. I don't see anything that Sarkozy is doing that's complicating that.
But Chris, there's certainly a sense in France that France today doesn't have the same politique arabe, the Arab policy that it used to have before, and is no longer saying anything that it used to say that would upset the Israelis.
No, but I'm sorry, but this, I mean, honestly, are we really talking about France?
Yes.
So, can we go to facts?
Yes.
First of all, on Gaza, France was the first country who condemned immediately the rocket fire from Hamas and the Israeli operation. I continue because
it was the same. It was not the same.
No,
the rocket and the bomb.
It was not the same.
It was not the same.
I really don't understand what we are talking about. Middle East still. Okay, who helped in changing the policy of the Americans on Lebanon? Who said there is a need for support to a national unity dynamics and a national dialogue?
But the ones who succeeded are the Qataris, not the French, right?
Ask the Qataris that we're working very closely with, who they built upon, whose efforts they built upon to reach the Doha agreement. They will tell you France, okay? On Syria, who was the first country to really push for a dialogue with Syria and try to bring back Syria in the positive dynamics in the region?
This is very true.
So I would like to say two things. The first thing, it's really overblown to speak of a drastic and dramatic change or shift in alliances. We have always fought alongside the Americans in a number of wars, and they were closer and closer cooperation, and now we are back in NATO.
President Sarkozy said that he will rejoin NATO with conditions that have to do with the European defense.
Yeah. That's
he
right.
joined NATO without any conditions.
He was wrong in saying under conditions, because these are conditions, or these are things that the Brits have got to deliver. Let me finish. I mean, on the question of the Middle East, it's the same thing. I mean, there was a gradual rapprochement, in particular with President Mitterrand, and now maybe a little bit more marked, but with what was said before, relations with the Arab world, with Egypt. So there is no drastic change or shift. Now we have got to deliver. We have got to deliver in Afghanistan, and I'm sorry, I mean, it's the Americans who are defining the policy on Afghanistan. It's not the French. It's not the European Union.
Do you mean the French are following on the American
No, they are
footsteps?
not following. They have their own opinion, but the policy is going to be made in Washington and not elsewhere.
This is not true. The Paris Conference, again, we organized the Paris Conference on Afghanistan, okay? I was a co-organizer of it. I remember perfectly. What was decided? To have a policy which was comprehensive, not only a military response, with a focus on the civilian response, with a focus on the regional dimension of the crisis in Afghanistan.
Christopher, are they listening? Are the Americans listening?
This is exactly what Obama said.
I think Obama's come in and he's adopted a policy that's very much like what I was hearing from French officials for a very long time.
There's a difference between the Americans adopting a French position, meaning that other Europeans are adopting, and France influencing American foreign policy in places like Afghanistan or Iraq. But do you influence American?
Well, I think there was a problem. I think there was a problem with Bush in that there was a sense of, particularly with the Chirac government, he would have liked to have influenced America. But America was not going to be influenced. There was not a common view of the way the world worked or where anybody wanted to go on the issue of Iraq.
But let's take the question of Iran. It seems that.
If it's a question of influence, it's easier to influence if you share a common view of the way the world works.
That's what I mean. So let's take the question of Iran. It seems that President Sarkozy is far more aggressive on the question of Iran, sanctions, more sanctions, while President Obama wants to engage the Iranians in
That's
dialogue.
absolutely, again, look at facts. I'm sorry, I heard you, Edwin, saying exact. This is exactly the contrary. We have a concerted approach, which is called the E3+3, which comes from the 3 Europeans, and then the Americans, the Russians, and the Chinese joined. The American representative of the new American administration is exactly saying the same thing that we are saying in this dialogue, which brings, brings a policy, which is dialogue and firmness. And can I tell you something where we influence on Iran? We said it would be probably not wise to have a major gesture in terms of direct dialogue between the US and the Iranian before the Iranian elections. We thought that it would have an effect on the elections. What happened 2 days ago? President Obama said, we will mainly speak with the Iranian, what we're doing for years and years after the elections. And they will join exactly what we're doing, a direct dialogue with the Iranians.
That's what I mean. America is adopting previous French politics and policies that President Sarkozy abandoned when he ran the elections.
On the contrary, this is exactly what we're promoting today.
So that's what they're promoting today.
With your permission, it's like Obama learns to Sarkozy. Sarkozy began with Bush. We began with a great alliance with Bush.
With the US.
No, with Bush.
With the US.
Your minister about Iran. I remember a few months ago.
Yes.
Speech warning US about Iran, about Turkey. Obama explained, and for me it's a great speech, and I agree with him. That's Turkey. It's a bridge between Orient and Occident. The man who is violently against Turkey in European Union is Sarkozy at this time. And also, I heard, and it's like a new politics, and it's an illusion for me, of grandeur. France, we are a little country. We are in Europe. We must act very collectively. And finally, de Gaulle, at this time, I think, should turn over in his grave. Mr. Sarkozy is theoretically a Gaullist, but he has taken the worst, and for me, he let the best, because the democratic issue in this time of crisis is very important. And the worst is the presidential monarchy, the dreams of grandeur, this sort of autocratic power, social concern. We don't discuss about how we manage the social crisis in our country. And also, because we want to be an example to the world, public morality.
Let's take some distance and get away. We are not French, we are not Americans or British. We get away a little bit. And what do we see? We have a constellation where we have a German in Berlin, a president in Paris, an American president, who are in a sort of sense genuinely and basically close to one another. The question is, can we do something on Iran? Can we do something on Afghanistan and Pakistan? And here the Americans have got to define their policy, and I'm pretty sure that the influence of the French is very, very little. It's going to be defined and designed basically in Washington in relations with what is going on the ground.
But does Paris recognize that, Anne-Marie, or is it in denial over that?
I tend to
As
think
an
that,
observer.
that people are pretty much aware that France has not many means in its hands. And just to be finished, I want to say the problems on the ground are so important that we are not going to solve Iran anyway, or Afghanistan. Here we will have to stick closer to one another.
Basically, I think Anne-Marie is exactly right. France's influence in these things, it can be detrimental, but it's not going to be decisive. It can help it from time to time. But who do the Iranians want to talk to? There's already a French embassy in Tehran. The Iranians are not dying to talk to the French. They are dying to talk to the Americans, and that's been clear for a long time. The Americans are going to have to lead this game again and again. You know, I think it must be kind of galling for Sarkozy to, in fact, have taken all these very intelligent, very realistic positions that often are followed by the Americans, and then have the Americans get all the credit, and Obama get all the credit. I mean, there's a personal element in it with Sarko, and we all know it. I mean, he looks at Obama and he sees this tall, elegant, gentle, black individual who's really striking and
class,
beautiful.
not the bling
That's
bling.
really
by the
classy.
way,
I would like to go back to a more serious issue, which is, do we influence the United States of America? Of course, we are not deciding on behalf of the American state, of the USA. Of course, this is clear. The US are bigger than France. You know that? This is true. Economically, militarily.
Militarily, it's 10 times bigger, by the way.
So
12 times
this is
bigger.
absolutely true.
But does France realize
So the question is, do we follow the Americans? The answer is no. So we are not saying that we are dictating the American policy, of course. We are just giving ideas that are sometimes useful and we believe are quite often followed also by the Americans. That's it.
2 points, very shortly. First, there is no the Americans. Bush and Obama, it's not the same. Follow Bush? No. Follow Obama? Yes. It's not the same.
Well, just a point about Bush. Bush's policy began to change radically in 2006. He began adopting a much more realistic, less ideological, much more pragmatic policy. Sarko becomes president in 2007. So it wasn't hard for him to deal with Bush realistically because Bush's own policies had become much more realistic by then.
Chris, you cannot forget torture, violation of human rights. In the name of democracy, that was Bush. That was Bush, not pragmatism. Not pragmatism.
We were the first country to welcome an ex-detainee from Guantanamo.
Last word from Anne-Marie.
Yeah, certainly Sarkozy is very extreme, but I'm not sure that his views are very extreme, and that he is capable of adapting. And what you said about Islam and the Arab world, I would not buy that. Certainly he's anti-Turkey. This, he says, does not belong to Europe. You know, the view of the southern part of the Mediterranean is a good example of embracing part of the Arab world.
Anne-Marie, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. We are out of time. I will be back with a final word in a moment. But before that, Michelle Henry reports from the Cannes Film Festival about the red herring behind the red carpet.
Glamour and glitz, flashbulbs and femme fatales. But is Cannes any more than just Hollywood on the Riviera?
To say that Cannes has sold out to Hollywood is not right. It's a joke. In reality, it's the opposite.
Hollywood has taken over. If you are not big, you have no room here. There's no room for you.
Cannes was meant to be a celluloid nirvana where avant-garde met independent. The French Nouvelle Vague, or New Wave cinema, was launched here, and filmmakers from the developing world would come to premiere their work.
Cannes Film Festival prides itself as being the place to discover emerging talent from around the world. The question is now, though, is that still the case?
It came a time that this festival was really there to support what we call developing countries. It was about to open doors to everybody, to welcome everybody, to create the diversity of cultures that we're talking about.
Director Souleymane Cissé from Mali was one of those who benefited.
I didn't understand how things worked. I got there and I was told I had to wear a tuxedo to get in, even when I showed them my badge. I left, I got dressed, came back, the film was over. I missed the screening of my own film.
Cissé says his victory had no lasting benefits.
I'm a filmmaker, but when I come and knock on the door of certain people, they refuse to open for me. But if I was an American filmmaker, they would open.
Some see the problem differently.
more and more difficult to produce that kind of films which could come in Cannes in Africa. It doesn't mean that there are no films produced in Africa, that's the contrary. There are thousands of films which are produced each year, which are not exportable. Because it's too local, it's not professional enough.
But some believe it's not a question of talent, as France dictating what works.
I think what they have to do is to understand how the industry works so that they can get the interest of the market. It doesn't mean you should sell your soul.
The director of the festival, Gilles Jacob, defends his baby.
J'espère bien que non.
I hope that Cannes doesn't dictate its taste onto the directors of the world. In reality, everyone has their own vision, their own way of doing things. What we're trying to do is to show the widest, most diverse ranges possible.
And to do that, he will continue to host the biggest party on the Riviera, with as much glamour and glitz as it takes.
France's foreign policy has been portrayed best by an Arab cartoon depicting President Sarkozy holding a big carrot as if it were a stick. But regional powers like Iran are no donkeys to be handled with carrots and sticks, at least as the former head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Dr. Mohammed al-Baradei, put it. France compromises its biggest asset, diplomacy, when it favors boycotts and sanctions, especially as the new American president embarks on a grand diplomatic engagement in the Middle East and internationally on the basis of mutual respect and mutual interest. Some claim Sarkozy is more rhetoric than retribution, like France's symbol, a loud rooster at the dawn of a new era. But judging from the president's decision to rejoin NATO, his hostility towards the likes of Iran and Sudan, and flat rejection of Turkey's membership in the European Union, they must be in denial over their country's foreign policy shift towards alignment with Washington and confrontation with its adversaries. Remember, France is stronger by the power of its values rather than the value of its dwindling power. Call me a romantic, but I still believe in liberté, égalité, and fraternité. Au revoir, until next time.